This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. Our fall season for 2022 began with our first Military History Night, presented virtually by Pat Hind-White. Our speaker was Gurth Pretty, amateur historian and naval reenactor of Oakville, Ontario, who spoke to us on the Forgotten Squadron, the Royal Navy on Lake Ontario during the War of 1812.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Patricia Hind-White and I organize this event. Welcome to RCMI Virtual Military History Night, Wednesday, September the 7th, 2022. This presentation will be videotaped for educational purposes and available on RCMI YouTube. There will be a question and answer period following Gurth's presentation, and ask that you mute your mics and turn the camera off until that time. Our guest speaker this evening is Gurth Pretty, and his topic, the Forgotten Squadron, the Royal Navy on Lake Ontario during the War of 1812. And at this time, I would like to extend a special thank you to RCMI member Barry Downs for putting me in touch with Gurth as an RCMI Military History Night presenter. Thank you very much, Barry. Our speaker is founder and director of HMS Psyche, Canadian Maritime Heritage Society, and warrant officer in the naval establishment of the Crown Forces of North America. He is an amateur culinary and naval historian, and for 20 plus years has been reenacting with different War of 1812 groups, both British Army and Royal Navy. His interest in the Royal Navy began upon volunteering aboard HM Schooner B, Discovery Harbor, Penetanguishene as a landsman. Aboard the Society's longboat, Gurth is the gun captain and occasional helmsman. And reenactment events, he is the ship's cook, preparing period meals over the campfire. He received his warrant from the Visualling Board, establishing him as a warrant officer. In his everyday life, Gurth is a master of the cheese at Mississauga's Lakeview Cheese Galore Cheese Shopping, certified cheese professional and cheese judge, and provides cheese educational seminars to all cheese lovers. Like I might say, I am one myself. That being said, and without further ado, a warm welcome, Gurth, and over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Patricia. It's a pleasure to be speaking to members of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. A little bit of background to myself. I do know the RCMI quite well. Prior to the renovations many years ago, I was given permission to do some research in the library because I was quite interested in the Canadian Light Dragoons cavalry unit that existed during the War of 1812. And also 1 year during the Toronto Doors Open event, I went back to RCMI to see the two portraits of Sir Isaac Brock and of the Shawnee Chief Tecumseh. So I've always been very interested about the RCMI and its history as well. So let me share my screen. Hold on. So you can see our topic. There we are. So this evening's topic is the Forgotten Squadron, the Royal Navy on Lake Ontario, which a lot of people do not realize of the presence of the Royal Navy. Now, when we think of, hold on, there we go, that's me, and some of my different personas, the cook and the gun captain. So when we think of the Royal Navy, there's some very famous people that right away come to mind. You know, Admiral Lord Nelson, Lord Cochrane, who was the main, so he was the model for the character of Jack Aubrey in the Master and Commander series of books, and of course during the movie. And also Sir Edward Pellew, who became an admiral as well, who became even better known due to the Hornblower books by C.S. Forester. But they're not in Canada or British North America. Famous Royal Navy actions. Well, it's the glorious 1st of June between the British and the French, the Battle of Copenhagen, the Battle of the Nile, and finally the Battle of Trafalgar. You start mentioning those names to naval and maritime enthusiasts, right away, they know about those. Now, where was the Royal Navy here in British North America? Well, they were mostly on the coast, whether or not escorting convoys up from the Caribbean up towards Halifax, which was the base of the North American Squadron, the St. John's, Newfoundland, protecting the fishing fleet off the Grand Banks, because there was always still a little bit of controversy there. And also they want to make sure that whether the French or the Spanish did not try to capture these important locations. On Lake Champlain, there was a naval shipyard at L'Île aux Noix, which is at the north end of the lake. On Lake Ontario, Carleton Island, and Point Frederick, which are both near Kingston. And then finally on Lake Erie at Amherstburg, which is at the mouth of the Detroit River, and Navy Island, which is at the opposite end of Lake Erie, almost just above the falls, actually. So the Royal Navy was around, and this is as early as 1791. But at that time, though, on the inland lakes, it was under the jurisdiction of the Provincial Marine. They were, how can I say it? They were basically commercial mariners who had an inkling towards the Navy. They were not part of the Royal Navy. They were administered by the Army. And their vessels, I'm not going to say ships, but vessels were used mostly for transport, whether for troops, government stores, coming from, say, Kingston, all the way to Fort Niagara and farther north. And also, in case of an emergency, in case of war, they could become fighting vessels. But if any of you know the Great Lakes, well, yes, some of them are quite shallow, especially Lake Erie, while others are quite deep. So the shipwrights decided, well, they're going to produce more shallow draft vessels. And the reason why? They didn't need to hold as much supplies. They didn't need to have big barrels of water, of fresh water, to store and to drink, because they could literally just throw a bucket over the side and get fresh water. And they were never too far away from a port to be able to get more supplies. Now, there was a presence on Lake Ontario by the Royal Navy as early as 1780, the HMS Ontario. She was the largest vessel built on the Great Lakes in 1780 on May the 10th. And, the reason why she was built was, those rebellious American colonials south of us, sorry, Captain Rodgard, the Royal Navy was concerned that they'd be pushing farther north and try to use the Great Lakes as another theater of war. Now, Carleton Island, if you're not too familiar with the island, is near Kingston, but is no longer part of Canada. It's actually now part of the United States. Well, let's see what, May, June, July, August, September, October. So 6 months after she was launched, she sank with all crew, all hands, including military and civilian passengers, because it got caught in the remains of a hurricane. And the vessel, she's officially a snow, which is a type of a brig. The wreck was only rediscovered back in 2008 in over 500 feet of water. There was another very famous smaller vessel called the HMS Speedy, built out of green lumber down at Port Frederick. They built her out of green unseasoned timber because they needed to build her fast. Again, why? Because of the perceived threat from the newly formed country to the south of us, the United States of America. On an occasion when the ship left from York, present-day Toronto, to go to close to Coburg, she got caught in a blizzard. And also the schooner was in a poor shape. Actually, even her commander said, you know, I don't want to take the vessel out because I don't feel that she's going to survive this trip, mostly because of the condition of the vessel. Well, he got forced to leave York Harbor, and she sank somewhere in the vicinity of Presqu'île Bay. But her demise, her sinking, greatly affected the early history of the British colony because there were so many prominent citizens on board because they were going to a court case. There was a Solicitor General, a judge, the High Constable of York, Justice of the Peace, members of the House of Assembly, land surveyors. Yeah, it really shook the colonial administration when suddenly this schooner sank with so many important people. There's an amazing display regarding the HMS Speedy if you ever have a chance to go to Presqu'île Provincial Park at their visitor center. But we're here to talk about the War of 1812. So I'm gonna have a drink first. I don't know if any of you have a drink, but I'm drinking some grog, being of course the Royal Navy. We're issued 2 pints of grog a day. So what were the reasons why the United States declared war on Great Britain? There was 3, and that's all. Trade restrictions on neutral countries brought about by the British against France. Well, the United States was a neutral trading company, or not company, country, and suddenly she would have to stop in English ports, and possibly if her products, the products that were being transported were to go to France, they could be seized and taken away. The second reason was the impressment of American merchant sailors by the Royal Navy. Because at that time, basically, if you spoke English, you were a subject of Great Britain. And the Royal Navy gave itself the right to stop merchant sailors, merchant seamen, and to take them aboard and force them to sign the book and join. From all the research I've read, it's approximately 6,000 American sailors. Now, there were a lot of British deserters from the Royal Navy who joined up with the American merchant fleet because of better pay and also because of being more, how can I say it, a little bit more on friendly terms, you know, fed better. And at various different points or ports, they could receive a letter of naturalization stating that, yes, they're an American citizen. Well, that was not accepted by the Royal Navy, and if you spoke the King's English, therefore you're one of his subjects, they could be taken. And then finally, the third major reason for the war was that the American government believed that the British was aiding and also inciting the the Native American nations to fight against the Americans. And why was that? Because the Americans were approaching or encroaching upon the Native Americans' territories. Now, we have to keep in mind, though, if we look at here at what's known in Europe as the American War of 1812, what the scenario is. When the United States declared war on Great Britain on June 18th, 1812, there's only 1,600 British troops located across Upper Canada at several different forts, while the American Army was numbering over 7,000 troops ready to cross the river or across the border whether from Detroit, Niagara, and Plattsburgh. I love this quote from President Thomas Jefferson, where he thought, the acquisition of Canada will be a mere matter of marching in and will give us the experience for the attack on Halifax, the major naval base for the Royal Navy. And then this would be the next and final expulsion of England from the American continent. These are the major people that we think of during the War of 1812. Major General Sir Isaac Brock, in charge of the armed forces here in Upper Canada, and also the governor, the Shawnee Chief Tecumseh, who was able to create a confederation of various different First Nations to work together and protect their homelands and become allies to the British. And Laura Secord, why? Well, it's definitely more than just because of the chocolate, but where she has been renowned for bringing information to the British about an impending attack in the Niagara Peninsula. Some of the best known battles that took place in Upper Canada, the Battle of Queenston Heights, where Sir Isaac Brock was killed, the Battle of Lundy's Lane, also in Niagara, Chrysler's Farm, east, I'm trying to remember, no, it's just a little bit west of Cornwall, and on the St. Lawrence, and the Battle of Fort York, where the American squadron based out of Sackett's Harbor transported American troops and attacked the fort and captured it. Now, if you look at these 4 different images, you notice that 3 of them are on water, showing really the importance of the control of the lakes. Because if you had control Lake Ontario, you control the supply and the transport of troops. And definitely the roads were horrendous back there. As well as known, Toronto back then was known as Muddy York because the roads were really muddy. But in all this, where's the Royal Navy? You know, this is the age of sail. This is just after the Battle of Trafalgar, of Nelson. Where are the hundreds of ships, frigates, brigs, sloops, bomb vessels, gunboats? Where are they? Well, they're busy. They're blockading ports around Europe and also along the Chesapeake Bay. They're performing convoy duty for the East India Company. Because why? Protecting economic interests. Getting those products from one market to the other, bring in more money to the coffers of the Royal Exchequer. Transporting infantry, artillery, cavalry, and other supplies around the globe. Individual ships cruising the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and along the eastern seaboard, looking for either enemy warships and merchant vessels to capture them, or worst comes to worst, to destroy them. It was the goal of most captains at that time aboard naval vessels to try and capture merchant ships and enemy warships, because if their navy decided to buy the ships, then they would receive prize money, which could be a significant amount. Also, attacking single enemy ships, coastal fortifications, and gun batteries. And, oh, this is the one I love, ... whatever else the Admiralty required of you. But we have to remember, though, who was the most important enemy at that time to the British? It was Napoleon. You know, he had control of the European continent. Great Britain had been at war since 1793, mostly against him. And the last thing they'd want is for him to succeed more in Europe and then eventually launch an invasion of Great Britain. So coming back to the Great Lakes, the Provincial Marine. Okay, so they're a small force. They did actually go into action. They attacked Sackett's Harbor, which was the main naval base of the United States Naval Squadron on Lake Ontario. It's actually only about 60 kilometers from Kingston by boat, really not that far. Unfortunately, The attack failed because different American vessels saw the squadron in the distance and was able to get back to Sackett Harbor, raise a warning so that the defenses were ready once the British squadron arrived. On Lake Erie, the Provincial Marine transported Sir Isaac Brock and all the British troops to Fort Amherstburg at the mouth of Lake Erie to attack Fort Detroit. Because again, keeping in mind that the British forts, there was Fort Amherstburg, which is now known as Fort Malden, in Amherstburg, Ontario. And there would have been Fort Erie at the opposite end of the lake, and then Fort George at the mouth of the Niagara River in Lake Ontario. So the troops, more troops had to be brought to Fort Amherstburg to be able to launch this attack. Also, the Provincial Marines, especially say the Queen Charlotte and the General Hunter, as you can see in the middle image, were used to bombard Fort Detroit during the attack. Just west of Kingston, later on in that year, the flagship of the Provincial Marine Squadron, the Royal George, was almost captured by the American squadron. This is known as the Flight of the Royal George, where this vessel had to go and protect herself under the artillery barrage from the gun crews at Port Frederick, because the Americans had a larger squadron and were able to sneak up on the Royal George close to Kingston, and they really tried to capture her. And that could have changed the output of the war as early as 1812. And then finally in 1813, they transported the troops from Fort Amherstburg. I know it was Fort Malden because I used to work there many years ago. From Fort Amherstburg to attack and besiege Fort Meigs, which was a depot for William Henry Harrison's troops about to try and recapture Detroit from the British. So it basically turned into a naval arms race here on Lake Ontario, because if you lost control of Lake Ontario, you wouldn't be able to get troops up and supplies to all the other forts and fortifications in the upper Great Lakes. Even the Duke of Wellington realized that. So in the winter of 1812-1813, shipwrights from New York City, from Boston, were sent up to Sackett Harbor to start chopping down trees and to start building a larger squadron. And you can see the top image there is that of Sackett Harbor. They built other naval bases at Presqu'île, which is now Erie, Pennsylvania, on Lake Erie, and Black Rock, very close to Buffalo. And actually, if you go to Sackett Harbor, it still has quite a naval heritage to the community. So if one side starts to build, so does the other. So the British started building at Kingston, at York, which is now Toronto, and also at Amherstburg. So there's 3 different naval yards. And you can just imagine all the activity, the sound, all these supplies coming in so that they could build bigger vessels so that they would be able to beat the opposing squadron the following spring. But due to the incompetence of the Provincial Marine and the British government realizing that this is turning into a bigger affair than what we thought originally, the Royal Navy took over the control and of the Great Lakes and gave command to Sir James Lucas Yeo, which is his portrait there that you see. He is a professional naval officer with over 20 years of experience. He was well known for his ambition and, taking no chances, taking no chances, meaning in the way that if he saw something that needed to get done, he'd get it done. But he was held back, you could say, because he had to get all of his plans approved by Sir George Prevost, the Captain General and Governor-in-Chief in Quebec City. And Prevost was known to be cautious. He only had a certain amount of troops, certain amount of supplies. And meanwhile, the United States had a lot more potential for getting more troops, easier for getting supplies. So he said, okay, I'm going to be very defensive. Well, that didn't work too well for Yeo because he was known as being aggressive. And he realized that he had to keep control over Lake Ontario, because if he lost control of Lake Ontario, then all of Upper Canada is lost. So he arrived in Quebec City in 1813, May the 5th, with 437 officers and seamen who were picked from various different Royal Navy ships and vessels in Halifax, and they made it all the way to Quebec City. Now, he had a reason to try and hurry it up as much as possible, because he'd heard about the news that the city of York had been attacked and taken by the Americans via the American squadron. So he got moving the very next day. Two vessels were destroyed in York's Harbor. The Duke of Gloucester, that was actually being repaired, and a frigate called the Sir Isaac Brock. And the goal for the American squadron is that they want to capture those two vessels and add them to their squadron. Well, it didn't happen, because as the British troops, British infantry left York, the Sir Isaac Brock was burned, and the Duke of Gloucester was in such poor shape anyways that it wasn't worthwhile for them to take. So within 10 days that we see from Yeo's arrival in Quebec City, by May 15th, 10 days later, he's already in Kingston. And that again is by the St. Lawrence River by boat, or by bateau actually by then, so that he could start getting all of his vessels ready, his men deployed, so that 2 weeks later, his vessels are ready to go out into the lake and start patrolling and start protecting British assets. So right here, you can actually see what the initial squadrons were on the lake, both for the American and the British. Not that many vessels, and also not that many vessels with a lot of guns. So when we're talking about guns, we're talking about with the images that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. There's carronades, which fire a heavy ball, but don't have a long distance, a big range. But it only requires a small amount of seamen. While a long gun can fire still a good-sized ball, up to 24 pounds, goes much farther, but requires 3 times the amount of seamen. And this is the thing that both Sir James Lucas Yeo and Commodore Isaac Chauncey, who is the commander of the American squadron, they had to keep in mind, okay, are we going to go with carronades, which are known also as smashers, so that we get really close and fire really heavy balls at the enemy ship? Or do we choose mostly long guns, which fire a lighter ball, but from a greater distance? So again, lots of strategy. And also the most important thing too is, well, what do we have access to? So the strategy by both Commodores was very similar. It was patrol, raid, and chase. Patrol around the lake, see if you find any enemy merchant ships or possibly enemy naval ships, attack them, or raid, whether it's having a raid on Fort Oswego, which is on the south shore of Lake Ontario, or the raid on Fort York by the Americans. You know, they basically were trying to hinder each other's growth as much as possible by capturing supplies. Now, the thing too that was happening, again, it's a naval arms race, is that as they're doing this, in each of their harbors at their naval shipyard, they're building bigger vessels, which will carry more guns, which will put them at the Advantage for the following spring. Now, as we talk regarding Lake Ontario, we can't forget also of ships that were lost, and this was due to nature. On August the 8th, 2 a.m., the U.S. schooners, the Hamilton and the Scourge, which were formerly commercial schooners taken over by the American Navy, were caught by a very powerful squall, not too far from present-day Hamilton. Now, these were schooners, and these were merchant schooners. They were, built for carrying cargo, not for having heavy guns up on deck. Well, fortunately, the squall caught them off the beam, off the side. The guns shifted, the vessels capsized, and only 16 survivors of 100 crew survived. 84 officers and crew perished. And if you've ever read the book Life Before the Mast by James Fenimore Cooper, he actually interviewed one of the survivors, Ned Myers, who was aboard one of these vessels, who had deserted from the Canadian Armed Forces or the British Armed Forces, because he's a native from Montreal. So the vessels stayed hidden, sunken in Lake Ontario until they were rediscovered in 1973. You might remember the wonderful photograph in the National Geographic magazine, actually. This image right here was taken by the National Geographic. And now both vessels are National Historic Sites. And I can't remember exactly in which year, but the ships were transferred over to the city of Hamilton to protect them from the US Navy. There was one incident that occurred here on Lake Ontario, and it's known as the Burlington Races. And that's actually a modern name to this chase, where on one occasion, both squadrons actually saw each other. So actually not too far from where I live here in Ontario, in Port Credit, Commodore Yeo, the commander of the Naval Squadron for the Royal Navy, sighted the American squadron of 10 ships. Actually, I should say, correct myself there, 10 vessels, of which Chauncey had his new flagship, the USS General Pike, and she sailed at the head of the squadron. Now, he also had those schooners, other schooners, I should say, that weren't very good sailors. So they were being towed by the larger vessels so that they would all be together to add extra firepower in case of a chance encounter with the Royal Navy Squadron. So in this circumstance, the Americans had the long guns for longer range, while the British mostly had carronades, the smashers. Oops, sorry. So the race begins. So basically from present day Port Credit, each squadron is trying to position itself in a way where they have the wind gauge, so they would be able to control, whether or not they wanted to attack or could go into a safe harbor. So around noon, the British believed they're in the best position. They open fire. The Americans respond by firing a broadside to them. Broadside after broadside, firing heavy shot into the hulls, chain or bar shot damaging the rigging. And also, and I don't know if you can see this, this is the most dangerous weapon. Actually, it wasn't a weapon. This is a splinter. So if you imagine a cannonball or a ball hitting the side of a ship, of which there's sailors on the other side, but suddenly the wood splinters and flies through the ship and literally making the sailors into human pin pads. More deaths were caused by this than actually by the balls or the shot. Yeo's flagship was badly damaged. 2 of her masts and its rudder, as well as rigging falling on the deck. So another British vessel, the HMS Royal George, came in between. That's where you can see in this other image right here, came in between the Wolf and the General Pike to fire off its guns at the General Pike, which was getting damaged formerly by the Wolf, and to give the Wolf a chance to quickly do some repairs. Well, via that encounter right there, General Pike's masts were badly damaged, as well as her sails and her hull. So, every commander of a vessel always keeps an eye on how much damage there is to their ship, because the last thing they want is for it to sink. So the Wolf's crew was able to quickly do the repairs to the damaged equipment and also throw dead crew overboard to regain control of their ship. But if you know Lake Ontario well, the wind was blowing from the east, and that means bad weather because our predominant wind is from the west. Well, both squadrons were being pushed to the west towards Hamilton Harbor or Burlington Bay, and that means something's happening here, bad weather. Now, the British were really in a bad situation. If they did not somehow beat off the Americans, they potentially could have gotten captured, the ships get captured, and that would, again, made the war change completely, the history of the war change completely. So they anchored in line, setting up spring lines on their anchors, meaning that they could easily rotate so that they could present a different side of guns. And they did this in Burlington Bay. If you've been to Waterfront Park in Burlington, that is where that occurred. So they basically now had a floating battery of artillery of 45 guns waiting for the American squadron to approach. Well, Isaac Chauncey did not want to take a chance. He didn't want to get his ships damaged. So he saw this defensive position, said, that's it, not worth it. I'm going to head towards Fort Niagara, anchor there under the protection of our guns at the fort, do our repairs, and then come back and attack again. Well, what he didn't realize is that the British were able to do all their repairs and go underway within 48 hours. So they escaped. Well, the one thing that kept on happening is bigger is better. Let's build something bigger so that it catches the enemy by surprise. And that is what the Royal Navy shipyard in Kingston did. They built the HMS St. Lawrence. She was 112 guns. So that's 56 guns on each side. Actually, she had more guns than the Victory, the most famous Royal Navy vessel of the time period. And she was the only ship ever to be launched and operated entirely in fresh water. Now you notice I'm saying ship and not vessel because she was a first-rate ship of the line. She had 3 masts, square sails, but also as she had so many guns, she was known as being a first-rate. Smaller vessels, yes, they might have 3 masts and square sails, but they'd have fewer guns. So they'd be known most of the time as a sloop of war, and not as a ship. Therefore, it'd be a vessel. So as soon as the St. Lawrence was launched, the Americans said, "No, we're not going out there. She's too powerful. We're going to stay right here in Sackett's Harbor." So the St. Lawrence never fired a shot in anger, never went to battle. At that time, though, Chauncey at Sackett's Harbor was building not just one, but 2 ships that would have had 120 guns. Well, hold on. I think it's time for a sociable. I don't know about you, but I'm getting thirsty. So this is a list of the ships that were both in the British and the American squadrons over the 2-year period. So you can see that the initial ships were not, initial vessels were not that big, didn't carry that many guns, but year after year, they were building more vessels, more ships, bigger and bigger and bigger, where finally, as you see in 1815, the New Orleans and the Chippewa were being built at Sackett's Harbor, each with 120 guns. While at Kingston, there was the Canada and the Wolf, a new version of the Wolf, that were being built with 112 guns. Who knows what would have happened if the war continued another year? It could have been a major battle in Lake Ontario with these large vessels and ships. But peace was looming. Now, after the British victory over the French at the Battle of Toulouse, seasoned British infantry divisions were available to come over to North America to fight against the Americans. The other thing, too, is that the American Treasury was nearly bankrupt. This was costing them a lot of money. And also, they weren't able to collect taxes on shipping because the ports were still closed to American merchantmen in Europe. And also, Great Britain had been at a war since 1793. So let's see, 1814, basically almost 1815. For 22 years, wars are expensive. So actually, in December 24th, 1814, the Treaty of Ghent was agreed to by the British and the American diplomats. The news did not make it to Quebec City until March the 8th, 1815. Because first thing is that this treaty had to be ratified by both the British and the American government, and it took a while for the official documents to make it back to Washington, D.C. But what happened, though, on the Great Lakes 2 years later in 1817 was the Rush-Bagot Treaty, which limited the size and the number of armed vessels on the Great Lakes. So it limited to basically one vessel per country on Lake Ontario, on Lake Champlain, and two for the Upper Lakes. Each vessel could be no larger than 100 tons and could only have one gun aboard. And this treaty was still in place until the Second World War, when the US Navy asked the Canadian government if the treaty could be set aside so that the US Navy could train more seamen aboard their vessels on the Great Lakes prior to being shipped to either to the Atlantic or the Pacific theaters during the Second World War. So what happened to all these vessels, all these ships? Well, here's an image of Kingston Harbor, and this is actually of Navy Bay. And this is actually Fort Henry right here. So basically the ships were dismasted, de-rigged, so all their lines and the ropes were removed. They were covered over. And then eventually they were sold to commercial interest. And quite a few of them also were scuttled in Deadman's Bay or Navy Bay. And if you know of the Kingston area, this area right here, that is now the the Royal Military College of Canada. So what were the impacts of the war? Well, the justification for the war became moot. Napoleon was no longer there. So no blockade of France, of Europe, therefore free trade. The war is over, therefore it needs fewer seamen. So no more or less impressment of American merchant sailors. And also the key leaders of the First Nations had been killed. So the push, the resistance against American expansion into the West was greatly reduced. Both countries were happy to finally it being over, cut expenses, resume trade, rebuild their economies. It went back to status quo antebellum. Basically, all the land that had been captured was given back to the two different countries. Now, the ships that were under construction were never completed. So this image right here you see is of the USS New Orleans in Sackett's Harbor. And that's how she looked into the late 1880s because she was on the stocks. They actually had built a special boathouse to protect her. And then eventually she was sold to make pencils. And she was nicknamed Old Never Wet because she never touched the water in Lake Ontario. Now, there are vestiges of the Royal Navy presence on Lake Ontario still to this day. If you make it to Fort Wellington National Historic Site in Prescott, you'll actually see the remains of a War of 1812 gunboat. If you make it to RMC, Yo Hall was built as a stone frigate. And that is the term for where all the masts, sails, rigging from the inactive War of 1812, the mothballed War of 1812 ships and vessels was placed. If you make it to Niagara-on-the-Lake, down to Fort George National Historic Site, there is the Navy Hall complex, of which there's one building remaining. And then right here in my community in Mississauga, there's the Anchorage Museum, which is the home of retired Royal Navy Commander John Skinner. And he served under Lord Nelson at every major engagement except the Battle of Trafalgar. He actually at that time was on convoy duty, heading to Malta to protect the merchant ships going back and forth between Malta and Gibraltar. So what is HMS Psyche, Canadian Maritime Heritage Society? Well, our whole goal is for people to discover more about the naval traditions on Lake Ontario and also the different skills required in operating vessels and small crafts. Now, there was actually an HMS Psyche. She was a 54-gun frigate. She actually, in effect, was almost like a Liberty ship. She was built in sections in England and shipped overseas, back then at a cost of £300,000. The reason why is that the Admiralty believed that there was not enough seasoned lumber and also not enough shipwrights and ship's carpenters in Kingston. So they pre-built sections, shipped them across the Atlantic. It was a surprise to both Sir James Lucas Yeo and Sir George Prevost. They did not know about this. There was 4 vessels shipped across, of which only one was actually reassembled, and that was the Psyche. She was launched the day after the treaty was agreed to, on December the 25th, 1814. So she was never commissioned. She never had her own captain, even though briefly she was the flagship of the new Commodore. She was held in ordinary, basically dismasted and de-rigged until the 1830s, and then her hull was scuttled. So sank somewhere in a local bay, and to this day, we do not know where she is. These are some images of some of the ships, of the vessels, the frigates in Dead Man's Bay and Navy Bay in Kingston, of which people can go snorkeling and scuba diving, but they are protected. Meanwhile, our society has its own longboat. It was built by Ken Fisher, a former professional canoe builder. This was his final project before he retired. She's built following the plans actually of HMS Pandora's longboat. Pandora is well known as being the vessel that went searching for the mutineers of the Bounty. So she's 22 feet in length, 6.5 foot beam, built with fiberglass reinforced with Kevlar, 2-masted, as well as having a bowsprit. She's currently spritsail rigged. We have 6 wooden sweeps between 14 to 16 feet long. Yes, we have an outboard motor as a safety precaution. We call it Siemens Suzuki. She's Canadian Coast Guard compliant, and we can accommodate a crew of 9. Tight, but we can do it. Our objective for 2023 is to continue to recruit and train new crew members, to raise funds for maintenance and improvement of our longboat, to re-rig her as a lug-rigged craft as compared to being a sprit sail rig. Our skipper and our bosun thinks that then she'll be a better sailor. Do keep in mind, she's just a longboat, so she only has a 2-inch keel. To participate at more War of 1812 reenactment events and commemorative events, public events, and like tonight, to provide and share insight into the maritime heritage of Lake Ontario, of the Great Lakes, that unfortunately so few people know about. And most importantly to us is to sail, row, be safe on the water, and have fun. Because being on board water, you know, you always have to give Mother Nature a lot of respect. Because we've been caught in a squall, and we're happy we made it out. So we invite everyone and anyone who's interested in to learn more about sailing, rowing, open fire cooking, hand stitching, because, oh yeah, I've restitched the sail and the boat cover many times. Rope work, having fun, people who've got skills in administration, legal work, fundraising, networking. Basically, we want anyone who's got 2 arms, 2 legs, who's ready to have fun and learn more. And you don't have to wear period garb. We take people out in modern clothes. It's only on special occasions we go dressed in our period clothing. So here's some photographs of some of the people who've come out with us. Grandparents with their 7-year-old granddaughter. She was a little bit scared when she heard our swivel gun being fired. To people working on the rigging. There's always something new to learn and more to discover. So if you want to learn more regarding our society, you can visit our website, hmspsyche.ca. You can communicate with us through our Gmail address. We have a very, very popular Facebook group page with over 500 members from around the world. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and also view our videos on YouTube. I'd like to acknowledge Peter Rindlisbacher, a well-known Canadian maritime heritage artist based in Texas now, for allowing me to use his marine artwork throughout this presentation. And if you'd like to see more of his work, definitely do visit his website, rindlisbachermarineart.com. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to stop my sharing. And if you have any questions regarding my presentation or comments, please definitely unmute yourself and go right ahead and ask away. Meanwhile, time for some more grog. Now, how many of you know what grog is? Anyone?
I do.
Okay, who said that?
Mary.
Hi, Mary. What's in grog, Mary?
There's a lot of good things in grog, and I'm not going to ruin it for you to tell the others.
Oh, okay.
We like grog.
You like it hot?
No, not saying we like grog, Gurth. Lots of grog.
Hi, Len.
How you doing?
Good. So grog is traditionally is 151 proof rum. So about I'm trying to remember now exactly. I guess about 4 ounces. Yeah, 4 ounces of 150 proof dark rum with 12 ounces of water, a little bit of lime or lemon juice, depending on what you could have access to. If the Spanish were on the French side, were allies to the French, then you might be able to get lime juice and not lemon juice, and a little bit of sugar, and you'd be given two pints of this a day, and that was guaranteed to every sailor at the time period. Now, you started off actually with a gallon of small beer, which is only 3%, but once the beer was all consumed or went sour, then they'd switch over to the grog. So I like it. It's good.
Right.
And I have a question, Garth.
Yes,
What cheese are you going to mate with the grog?
well, actually, as part of the daily food or weekly food rations of the Royal Navy at this time period, they did receive 12 ounces of cheese.
Right.
From the research that I've read by Miss Stevenson, I can't remember her first name, they received 12 ounces of what's known as a Suffolk cheese. So it'll be a British territorial cheese, of which I don't know if that's still being made or not. Now, it was not known as being a good quality cheese. So the Victualling Board actually did switch over to cheddar and to Lancashire and to Gloucester cheese, but it was more expensive.
Yeah.
You know, don't want to spend too much money on the sailor's food. No.
Well, Garth, when do you think that happened, that transfer from Suffolk up north?
Oh, I don't know. As I said, I have not found very much information regarding that cheese, and also I'd have to take a look more through my documents because I have 2 of her books, of which one I still haven't cracked open yet because it's really a thick tome of a book. It'd be interesting to see, you know, exactly when they switched that over to just the Suffolk cheese to other British territorials.
Well, if I may, I think that would be a wonderful thing for you to submit to our Kedge Anchor or to the Dispatch from the standpoint of what you can find.
So can you imagine 12 ounces of cheese for every seaman? So aboard the HMS St. Lawrence, there's 800 officers and crew.
Yeah.
812 times 12 ounces a week. of cheese until it went rancid. Because of course, you know, they would keep it down in the hold, and of course the rats would get to it, and there's no refrigeration. So how long did it keep? Good question.
Well, I was going to say, it has nothing to do with the cheeseheads of
Of
the Green
Wisconsin?
Bay Packers.
No, 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 that's hard cheese.
Any questions at all?
Any other questions? Mary's got another question.
I don't have a question. I just want to say how much I enjoyed your presentation.
Question.
Yes, Diane.
Sorry, guys, I'm not my normal bubbly self right now, but I will be in the spring when I come home to visit. How often do you have the cadets there?
The cadets where?
Where, yeah, to help with the
Oh, with this, with our
ships
longboat?
with the, yeah.
Well, the challenge that we currently have is we're a small society. We do have boat insurance, but we don't have commercial boat insurance.
Okay.
Oh,
So, so we ask anyone who comes aboard who's not a member of the boat crew of the society to sign an insurance waiver. And unfortunately, many organizations, youth organizations, will not sign those because we don't have $4,000 a year to pay for just boat insurance. We need that money just to maintain the boat and to upgrade it. We've been trying to love to try and get Sea Scouts, Sea Cadets. I know that unfortunately a lot of Sea Cadet crews nowadays don't even have access to the old whaler boats, again, because of either insurance or because the crafts are in such poor shape. Our Commodore of our organization bought 2 old Sea Cadet whalers from a Montreal base, and he was basically told, okay, yeah, come and choose them, and we can't guarantee they float. You take
wow.
you take everything, and basically he assembled out of the 2 boats, 1 working boat, which is now actually in off the coast of the Pacific in Washington State, being used by the crew by the HMS Chatham. So I'd love to do more things with the cadets. We just have to try and find a way that everyone agrees to it. Our closest Sea Cadet Corps is actually in Streetsville, which I don't really understand because that's not close to water.
Really? Nothing in Burlington or Oakville?
No, we're in Port Credit, so it's a possibility. And we actually even have a Sea Cadet or Sea Scouts associated with my yacht club. They've come to look at the boat, but they haven't been able to be on the boat yet.
Well, maybe not on the water.
Yeah.
But
No,
that's it's
definitely.
valuable.
Oh, definitely. And even them to learn more skills. It's great to know how to make a bowline, but do you know what to use it for?
Exactly. And to actually see history in the making, because you're basically rebuilding some of those ships.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very true. Yeah. No, we have
Well,
the Toronto 65th Sea Scouts, who actually, 2 of their scouters bought an old whaler, repaired it, and the only thing they ask to their scout group is to pay for the insurance. So then the Beavers, Cubs, Scouts, Venturers, and Rovers can go out, and some of them actually participate at War of 1812 reenactment events, naval events. So,
Well, thank you.
things happen. You're welcome. Meanwhile, last question, I saw Michael Clary had a question, had his hand up.
Go ahead.
You wish to unmute
Well,
yourself. Yep.
it wasn't so much a question as I was just going to recount my amusement having visited Sackett's Harbor and Fort Henry. There is, they both have plaques for the Battle of Sackett's Harbor. And the one at Sackett's Harbor explains the great American victory for the summer, keeping the whole British Navy of the Great Lakes at bay outside of the harbor. And then the plaque in Kingston talks of the British victory. For the whole summer, they kept the American fleet bottled up in Sackett's Harbor.
Yeah.
So
Two
it's
different
all about
aspects
point of view.
Yes, very true. 2 different perspectives. Yeah, so true. Well, I'd like to thank Pat for contacting me, and through Barry, who suggested me to Pat to do my presentation. Definitely, please go onto our website, come communicate with us. If there's anything we can do for any organization to do presentations to them or to try and get people out. If any of you want to come out onto the longboat, let us know. We would be happy to have you out on the boat. Just to let you know, for those of you who aren't sailors, there's no head, meaning there's no toilet.
No. Well, I want to thank you very much for a really colorful and in-depth presentation on a topic that's not terribly well known. Well, I didn't know much about it. I know a lot more now. So thank you very, very much. And at this time, I usually present you with a thank you gift from RCMI, but
More rum?
yeah,
Thank you from Great Lakes Training.
yeah, just
There you go.
look out for the post and he'll do the job for me. But,
I'll look forward to the dispatches.
and with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation, and I now declare this meeting ended. Thank you all. It's been a great evening. Thank you. And thank you.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.